Excluded, overlooked, discarded, abandoned. These are the labels given to those the world deems inferior, lesser than. But Jesus took the wisdom of the world and turned it upside down. He embraced the untouchable, brought hope to the desperate. When others avoided, he drew close. Where others cast judgment, he offered forgiveness. Jesus' actions seem foolish in the eyes of the world, but to encounter the foolishness of God is to encounter true wisdom, a wisdom that begins and ends with Jesus.
Man, that's good, isn't it? That's good. I've loved this series. I don't know if you've loved this series as much as I have. But beyond the series, I love this service. Like Nick was saying, man, the Team 430, you guys are awesome people. I've loved getting to meet you, and we've had so many new families that we've talked to, new visitors in the living room this year. And it's been a joy to worship God with you. And man, the past 30 minutes, man, I hope you're ready for God. I hope you're ready for Jesus and what he's doing. And we're doing this series called Rejected, where we're talking about people who are rejected or overlooked or outcast. And there's these labels that are put on us. And if you're excluded, this is for you. If you feel rejected by the world or sometimes feel rejected even by the church, man, this is what we're talking about. These are the stories that we're talking about. And labels like rejected, excluded, overlooked, desperate, these are the labels that best describe middle children. Am I right, middle children? I don't know if there's middle children here. How many here are firstborns in the room? All right, they're like, woo, they're like, applaud for us. We're the firstborns. That's what we're used to. Everybody applauding for things we do. How about the youngest? Who's the baby in the family? Baby, woo! Spirit fingers for me. Babies in the family, they just get everything, don't they? Like just everything handed on a silver platter. All the rules are out the window by the time they come along. They can do whatever they want, stay out as long as they want. And then there's us. Those of us who are middle. Raise your hand if you're a middle child. There we go. Somebody give them a hug. If you're sitting around someone who just raised their hand, just hug them. They need it. They're often overlooked and forgotten. That's our role in the family, is to be left out. Moms always say, they'll tell you this, I love all my children just the same. And moms, I'm sure you've said that. But then who do you forget at church? Who do you forget at the grocery store? Who do you have to remember? Oh, tomorrow's their birthday. We should probably do something. It's the middle children. We always get left out. If you're a middle child, you probably remember this moment here. The moment that you realized that you were the middle child. Let's put this picture up. That hurt deep right there for some of you. Look at the happiness and the joy in the oldest child holding that baby, and then the middle child knows not one more time will he ever get the attention of mom, dad, or his siblings, right? And so parents, they try to make up for it and say, well, we don't want to forget you. We'll send you outside to play with your older brother. And so this is what it looks like when older brother plays with middle child. It's like, I'll swing you, and they begin to kick you and pick on you and beat you up. And there's actually something called the middle child syndrome, where middle children, they go through deep darkness because the oldest sibling, they get all the responsibility, they get all the accolades. It's like, oh, the firstborn graduated college. Let's give them a round of applause. And then by the time you get there, it's already been done and nobody cares anymore. And they get all the responsibility. They get to do everything at home. And then there's a young child, well, they just get everything. They get all the indulgences. They can do whatever they want, and they're the parents' favorite. All the people are looking at them and oohing and awing over the little bitty one. And then there's the middle child who just looks into the eyes of their mother and dad and says, Mother, Father, what about me? Don't forget me. What about me, Mom? What about me, Dad? And some of you sitting here are middle children, and some of you sit here today and feel like the middle child of God's family. You feel like the middle child in the faith, where you look around the church and you look around at people who are in the family of God, and there's that person who, they seem to get all the responsibility, they get all the accolades, everybody applauds for where they are in life. And then there's that other person, the young child of the family of God, who it seems like they get everything they want. Like when they've got a prayer request, they come before God and they pray, and God gives it to them for some reason. And then there's you, and then there's me. We come before God and we're just like, God, what about me? Like for one moment, can I have your attention? For one moment, can you just look on me and smile on me with your mercy and your grace as well? And a lot of us get to a point of desperation even, where it's like, God, please, just one moment. I've been praying about this forever. Can you just one moment just consider me as a child right now? And as we're in this series of rejected, a lot of us, we look at the world and says, well, the world rejects some people, or maybe the church rejects some people. Some of us sit here and we're confronted with this question: God, is it you that rejects some people? Because I feel ignored. I feel left out from you. I feel possibly rejected by you. And if you sit here today and you feel like the middle child in God's family, you feel ignored, you feel rejected, you feel like your prayers aren't heard, this story is for you. Open up to Luke chapter 8. We're going to start with verse 40. In Luke chapter 8, verse 40, this is the story before we get there. It's the story of what it looks like to be in a desperate situation. And so the big idea of today's sermon is this, and you can write this down, that faith learns to fight on the streets of desperation. Faith learns to fight on the streets of desperation. And we're going to be introduced to two people who find themselves on the streets of desperation. Now, what this story opens up with is Jesus. He's on this boat with his 12 disciples, and they are sailing on the Sea of Galilee. They just got back they were on the opposite side of the Sea of Galilee where Jesus was doing some ministry. He actually, right before this, frees a demon-possessed man of this demon, and this man's been walking around naked, and everybody's like, this guy needs to put some clothes on. Someone get this demon out so he can put some clothes on. Jesus helps him, then Jesus gets on the boat, and then he begins to head back across the Sea of Galilee to the city of Capernaum. And as his disciples and him are on this boat, they're floating up to the shore of the city of Capernaum, and they look to the shore, and there's this large crowd of people just sitting there waiting for Jesus to return. It's like those original days when Apple was releasing the iPhone and everybody's out in front of the AT&T store. This is what the picture is. Everybody's lined up, they're crowded towards the shore, and they are just waiting for Jesus to come back. These are thrill seeker people. They're like, man, I want to see what Jesus is going to do next. This guy's an amazing teacher. He teaches with authority. He does these amazing miracles, and everybody in town had heard that he was coming back, so they crowded to the shore to see Jesus come back to their town. And Jesus, he pulls his boat up. Disciples hop out, he hops out, and they are immediately just pressed in with this crowd of people. And these people, they're trying to get this just glimpse of Jesus. They're just trying to get a hand on Jesus. They want to get a word spoken with Jesus. Maybe Jesus will make eye contact with them. Maybe Jesus will say something to them. And as this crowd is pushing around, there's one person particular in the crowd that is really, really in need of the attention of Jesus. It's a guy named Jairus, who I'm guessing feels like a middle child. And this is how his story goes, starting with verse 40. It says, there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. See, a lot of these people that are crowding in, they want to just get a glimpse of Jesus. They're excited to see Jesus. Jairus, he's in a place of desperation. He has found himself on the streets of desperation in this moment. Now, the thing about Jairus is what we learn is that he's the ruler of the synagogue, which means he's the one who puts together the religious service for Capernaum. So he's seen in the community as this high-standing man of faith. This is a guy who has a relationship with God. This is a guy, if you got a prayer request, you got something going on, you slip that note to Jairus and ask him to pray for it. Because he's got this close relationship with God, and surely he's teaching the Bible to everybody, he's meeting everybody knows him, and then we see this tall, standing man of faith, all of a sudden, on his face, at the feet of Jesus on the streets of desperation. It says he's in this crowd, and all the crowd is begging for Jesus' attention, but he's imploring Jesus. And I don't know if that word imploring is strong enough. Because something's happened in his household. Well, now his 12-year-old daughter is lying on her deathbed. And it's his only daughter. It's his only child. And he's not just going to Jesus saying, Jesus, if you don't mind, if you've got a moment, will you please give me some of your attention? The picture you need to have of Jairus is face down, on his hands and knees, face to the street, just imploring Jesus, Jesus, come to my house. Jesus, you are my only hope. She's gotten to the point of she's getting ready to die, and I need your attention for a moment, Jesus. But please, in this moment, forget about the oldest and the youngest in the crowd. Come and give me what I need. I need you in this moment. And the thing about desperation is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter how holy you are. It doesn't matter how much you read your Bible. It doesn't matter how great your prayer life is. You will eventually find yourself on the streets of desperation. Every single one of us. I've seen it happen time and time again. Where there's people who, we take pride in being a pillar of strength, and maybe that's you. Maybe you take pride and you consider yourself, man, I'm the pillar of strength in my family. When something's going wrong, I've got to keep my act together. I've got to hold strong. I've got to be that strength for my wife, or I've got to be that strength for my children. I've got to be that strength for my community. Whatever happens, we take pride in being these pillars of strength. But the thing is, pillars of strength, man, they topple to the ground. I've seen it happen time and time again. I've had conversations with a mother whose 17-year-old son didn't wake up one night. They found out later that he had some kind of heart defect that nobody knew about, and the only way they found out is one morning he doesn't wake up. There are pillars of strength in the church. And then to see that faith just come crumbling to the ground of what do we do now of God? I need you. I need your attention in this moment. I've seen parents look at their children. I've seen children look at their parents where they watch a mother pass away from breast cancer, or they watch a father who's committed suicide, who seem to have a strong faith in God. And it's like we experience these moments of desperation, and desperation doesn't care who you are. Desperation doesn't care where your membership is. Desperation will eventually find us. I've seen people lose friendships. I've seen people lose a job. I sat across in my office from a man who's in his 50s, had this great career, and all of a sudden, one thing happens. He loses his job. He loses his income. He then loses his home, and now has to figure out what to do with his kids. Of how is he going to care for them when he has no home, he's living in his car, he has no job, no prospect for it. And we're faced with this question: what do we do in the midst of desperation? When desperation comes, you can either fall from your faith or fall to your face. That's your two options. You can fall from your faith or fall to your face. First option here is we want you to try to stand strong. When you're like, I'm going to be a pillar of strength in this moment of desperation. I'm going to stand strong. I'm going to pull all my pride together. I'm going to stand here, and I'm going to take the world's beatings, and I'm going to not consider any of my emotion. I'm not even going to think about grieving. I'm going to stand here strong. And when you do that, what you find out is your desperation will eventually humble you. That's what's going to happen. You're going to tumble. Or you can go for a second option. And it's a more radical option. And it's the option that Jairus chooses: to humble yourself and then let Jesus lift you up. To fall face before your Lord, face on the ground, no matter what your standing is in the community, and to humble yourself and let Jesus lift you up. James 4 says it like this: weep. In James 4, 9 and 10, he says, weep, mourn, and then watch your mourning turn to laughter. Humble yourself before the Lord, and he will exalt you. He will lift you up. And so Jairus, he's in a moment of desperation. His 12-year-old only child is dying, and he falls before Jesus, and Jesus lifts him up. Of all the people that are pressing in the crowd, Jesus looks at Jairus, lifts him up, and they begin to walk towards Jairus' home. And as they're walking, I don't know what's going on in this moment, but I believe Jesus and Jairus are right next to each other. They're rushing. They're trying to get through the crowd, but the crowd is just pushing in, pushing in, pushing in. I picture the disciples being like the bodyguards, trying to shove people out of the way, move them like Justin Bieber's bodyguards moves teenage girls out of the way. The disciples are pushing people out, but they just can't quite get in. And it says that they're pressing in on Jesus, and the word pressing in is like this picture of an olive being squeezed where the oil comes out of it. That's how much they're pressing in. Everybody's touching Jesus. Everybody's grabbing Jesus. And then in the midst of this, Jesus stops, and he says this, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" And one of Jesus' disciples, his name is Peter, looks at Jesus like, what do you mean, who touched you? That's the most ridiculous question to ask in this situation. Jesus, everybody's touching you right now. And Jesus is like, no, somebody touched me. I felt power leave. Someone touched me in this crowd. And what we find out is that there's another person face down on the streets of desperation. In Luke chapter 8, starting with verse 43, we get a picture of another person who was in the crowd. It says, there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. Now this is a big deal right here, the situation that this woman finds herself in. 12 years, for 12 straight years, she's had a menstruation issue where she is just flowing blood constantly. And it goes on to say that she's tried everything to try to cure this. She's seen doctors, she's seen physicians, she's sold all that she has in order to pay for some advice, some piece of advice that would cure her from her disease. And she can't find anything. And she's in this moment of desperation because it's more than just a blood issue. It's a social issue as well. This blood issue that she's facing, it means a few things. It means that if she's bleeding like this and has this malfunction of her system, that she can no longer go to the temple until it's stopped. She can no longer go to sacrifice. She can no longer go to worship at the temple. And so now there's this division between what she feels is her and God. Not only that, but in Leviticus 15, it says that she can't touch anything, and that nobody can touch her, or they're made unclean as well, and she's treated like she has Ebola or something, and they've quarantined her, and she has to be by herself, and she can't embrace the people that she loves, or can't be embraced by someone that she cares about. And so there's this big issue she's going for. 12 years she goes through this, and she is desperate. She's at the end of her rope. She's at the end of her bank account. She's almost lost hope, and then she hears about this man named Jesus. And she wants to go get a little bit of his attention too. So it goes on to say this. So she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. Now, it's important, this part of it, because it's not like she just walked up to Jesus and kind of passed through the crowd and got his attention. I mean, the crowd is pressing in on Jesus. And she's in a situation where she's not supposed to be around people and touching people. And so in her mind, she wants to sneak in there and get a healing from Jesus. And so she's got to fall on her face and crawl hands and knees between the feet of the crowd, trying to maybe just touch the fringe of his garment. And so she has this superstitious idea that maybe there's miraculous powers, there's this magical power in his garment, where if I can just touch the little tassels on his prayer robe, if I can just touch that, maybe I'll be healed. And so it says she came up behind him, touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And this is the moment where Jesus stops the crowd and says, "Who touched me?" And you got to imagine, at this moment, she went from being excited to being scared to death. She didn't have plans of being noticed. Her plan was to get in and get out, get a miracle and get out. I don't know if that's you. Does anybody go to the like Target or Walmart and you're a self-checkout person? You'd rather do self-checkout, like scan it yourself. Like you don't want to, like that's me. I don't want to go through the cashier if I don't have to and get the smile and have the conversation, and then they're judging everything that they're scanning. Like, what do you need this for? And like I want to avoid that. When I go to the store, I want to get my thing and go, right? And that's what this woman had in mind. She wanted to get her thing and go. She was looking for this self-checkout healing. She's like, all I want to do, sneak up to Jesus from behind him, touch the tassels of his prayer shawl, get my healing, and then get out of there. No smiles, no conversation. Nobody has to know, but then I've got the healing that I want. And that's what a lot of us want from Jesus. That's our prayer to Jesus. We're like, Jesus, can you give me what I want? And so the question I have for you is this: which do you desire more? Jesus' help or Jesus himself? This is an important question. In your moments of desperation, which do you desire more? Jesus' help or Jesus himself? That's a tough one, especially when you're desperate. Especially when you find yourself face down on the ground. Like if we're mature in our faith, we know the right answer, right? Well, obviously, I want both. I want Jesus himself and I want Jesus' help. But if we're honest, in this moment, what I really want is just the healing. In this moment, what I really want is that job to come back. In this moment, what I really want is this person to experience full restoration. What if I really want is this relationship to be restored? And if I can get that without Jesus himself, that's what I would choose. But Jesus, he stops the crowd and says, who touched me? Because he knows that he has way more to offer than just healing. If Jesus had to choose one to give you, he would give you himself. Because he knows that that's more valuable than the healing in itself. And so he stops the crowd. He says, who touched me? And he takes a long time trying to figure this out because it says that no one in the crowd, or everyone in the crowd said it wasn't them. So Jesus is asking everybody. He's pointing, he's like, hey, was it you that touched me? No? Okay. How about you? You touched me? No? Who touched me? It was you. You touched me. Nope. And he goes around, nobody admits to it. And the woman gets the sense like, oh, I'm going to be found out. So she eventually raises her hand and says, you know, it was me who touched you. And she goes on to actually tell the rest of her story. The crowd's attention turns towards her, and she begins to tell her testimony. And all the full details of it. At one moment, she wanted to be anonymous, but now her story's drawn out of her, and she says, I've had this blood issue for 12 years. I spent all that I had. Nobody could heal me, and I thought that if I could just get through the crowd and touch his garments, I would be healed. I got through the crowd, touched his garment, and now I am healed. And she is excited about this. She is happy about it. That's why she tells her story. She's not afraid to tell it. And everybody, I imagine, is looking and they're like, that's what they were expecting of Jesus. When they were crowding the shore, they're like, this is what we wanted to see. And now Jesus is passing out miracles. He's doing great things, and they're applauding. They're excited. And Jesus looks at this woman and says, this is what I wanted to give you. And so he actually says something to her. He says these words. He says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Now, this is an important sentence because this is the gift that Jesus gives. She just wanted the healing. He wanted to give himself. And so now he looks at her. And you know what he gives her? Not just a healing, but he gives her affection. He says, you're my daughter. You're my girl. And Jesus calls nobody else this in scriptures. At another time, he would call someone, you're the daughter of Abraham. But here he says, you're my child. You're my girl, daughter. And he says, it's your faith that made you well. He says, it had nothing to do with my tassels. It had nothing to do with my prayer shawl. There's nothing magical or mystical about my clothing. What made you well is that you believed, that you had this faith, that you looked to your God the Father and you believed that through me somehow that you could receive restoration. He says, so it's your faith that's made you well. You are well. You are healed. You have gotten what you've asked for, but not only that, you're getting even more. So he says, go in peace. He says, go in the shalom of God. And this is an important thing for her to hear as well, because she's felt at odds with God. She's felt a separation between her and God, a separation between her and the community, a separation between her and the people of God. And now Jesus says, go in peace, which is this idea that the division has been removed, restoration has come, you're receiving affection, you're receiving healing, and you're receiving restoration, and I have so much more to give you than just the healing. And church, here's something we need to know. Even in our desperation, our prayers can be too small. And we think they're big prayers. We're like, God, I just need this one thing from you. And Jesus is like, I got so much more for you, though. I have so much more for you than just that. I am a God of healing, but I'm also a God who loves you, a God who desires you, a God who wants you. So everybody's got to be excited, especially this woman. She got this healing in her moment of desperation. There's rejoicing, I'm sure. There's praising of God, I'm sure. And then the rejoicing is interrupted with news that turns laughter into tears. A man comes up to Jesus, and Jairus, who's still standing right next to him, and says these words. It says, while Jesus was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. And in the Greek, the first word in that word order is dead. The first word that this man speaks to Jairus is death. It's your only child, your only daughter. She died. And this is something that is really hard for me to grasp. I'm going to be honest with you. One of the things I do when I'm preaching and I'm reading through a story and trying to visualize a story is I'll try to visualize it from different characters in the story. And so when I'm reading something like this, I'll try to imagine the story from the perspective of the crowd. I'll try to imagine it from the perspective of the disciples. I'll try to imagine it from the perspective of the woman or Jesus. When I get to this part of the story, I'm going to be honest, it's really hard for me to even try to do that. I don't want to feel the pain that Jairus felt when the words, your daughter is dead, was spoken. I've got a 12-year-old daughter. Those are not words I want to hear. Some of you have felt the pain of those words. The hard part for me, though, is not necessarily just the words, but the fact that Jairus is standing next to Jesus and his daughter still died. That's hard for me. Like, to be right next to your Lord and Savior, the one who has power over life, to be standing next to him and hear that your daughter has died. I don't know what Jairus was going through in this moment. Like, just before this, he hears that this woman's being healed, and I don't know if he had excitement that if Jesus can do it for her, then he can do it for me. I don't know if he was experiencing frustration maybe of, Jesus, can we please just get to my house? Let's not stop and figure out who touched you. And I know it's probably important, but this is my only daughter. This is my girl. This is my little lamb. Can we please get to my house? And then to hear the words that your daughter has died. Maybe because Jesus stopped to help someone else. I don't know if Jairus was feeling like a middle child in this moment. If I prayed, did all the right things, I came to the right person, and I still experienced this, and I experienced this death. And then the person from Jairus' house who brings the news not only says that your daughter is dead, but then he has the audacity to say, don't bother the teacher anymore. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Jesus has failed you. Jesus has let you down. In your grief, Jesus has disappeared. So don't bother him anymore. And some of you, this is where you are in your walk with Jesus right now. You're in this moment that Jairus has experienced. If you've prayed and you've begged and you've implored and you've felt this closeness to Jesus, but then something happened, something went wrong, and your career, your friendship, a loved one died on the deathbed of desperation. And then we have this idea of, man, I don't know what to do with you now, Jesus. I don't know what to do with you right now. And the world is even telling you, you know what, don't bother with Jesus anymore. Don't bother with faith anymore. Just move on from those fairy tales. Move on from that because these have no use to you now. And some of you, you're teetering in your faith in that moment. What I love about this story is something that's actually not written in the story itself. What we see is Jairus gets this news, and then I'm sure he's panicking. His daughter's just died. And then Jesus, he looks right into Jairus' eyes and says, just keep believing. Don't stop believing. Like, just keep holding on to faith. And then the very next verse is that they were at his house and a crowd was there. What Luke leaves out is he leaves out a very intimate moment. And I believe he left it out because it's not for us to know. It's for Jairus and Jesus to know. He leaves out the walk from the shore of Galilee to Jairus' house. Imagine that walk. Imagine that conversation. As this crowd is still pushing on Jesus, and Jesus is like, hey, keep your eyes on me. Like, don't give up faith. Like, keep believing. And they keep walking, and every step of the way, she's not getting better. She's not being healed. She's still dead every step of the way. And I don't know how long that walk was, but for some of us, that's a long walk with Jesus. That's a walk of years, of decades with Jesus. What we learn about Jesus is Jesus doesn't detour around our grief. Jesus walks in our grief. And some of us, we think that about Jesus. We're mature in our faith, and so we're like, Jesus, I'm going to come to you with this prayer of desperation, but if you don't answer it and you let me down, then I'm going to distance myself from you. And some of you, you feel like Jesus has let you down, God has let you down because he hasn't answered your prayer. And so we try to distance ourselves because we think Jesus is good in our desperation. And then we know that at the end of time, things will be great in heaven, and we'll be in heaven, and things will be made better. But that gap in between, that grief in between, that's for me alone. I'm not going to bother Jesus with the grief. Jesus walks with Jairus in the grief. Every step of the way, right by his side, saying, hold on to faith. Hold on to your faith in me. And I want you to know that Jesus, he doesn't just walk in our grief, but he cries in our grief. He knows the pain that you're going through. There's a story in John chapter 11 where one of Jesus' friend Lazarus dies. And he hears news about this, and everybody's grieving around him. And there's a short little verse in chapter 11, verse 35, where it just says, Jesus wept. And I find solitude in that. To know that Jesus doesn't just leave me in my grief, but he walks in it and he cries in it. He feels the pain of it. Jesus feels your grief. And I don't know where you are right now, but don't listen to the world when the world tells you not to bother the teacher anymore. Don't stop bothering the teacher. He's not going anywhere. He's not leaving you. He's not forsaking you. He's walking with you in your grief. So walk with him in your grief, because he's not just walking in your grief, he's walking to your victory. Because that's where Jesus is going. He's walking in this grief towards something. He's still heading to the house with Jairus. And we get this great picture of the story where Jesus and Jairus and all the crowd, they come up to the house, and the closer they get, they hear the noise of mourners happen. And so I don't know how long of a walk it was, but it was long enough where people found out, and there was mourners there. People were crying and wailing, and Jesus comes up to the crowd, and he's like, shh, shh. She's not dead, she's just sleeping. And the crowd looks at Jesus and like, what do you mean she's just sleeping? And it says they actually laugh at Jesus. In this crowd, there's likely some professional mourners. In this culture, you would actually hire people to come and mourn for the family and with the family. That was their job, to cry and to weep and to wail. And so some of these people, they've experienced funerals. They've experienced mourning. They're like, we've seen death and we know death. This little girl is dead. And they actually laugh at Jesus. And in the book of Mark, it actually says that Jesus put them outside. I love that. He's like, hey, I just need you to leave right now. And sometimes we just need to ask people to leave. If they're not going to listen to Jesus, if they're not going to follow Jesus in our life in these moments of desperation, sometimes we just need to say, you know what? Not now, and move them out. And Jesus grabs three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and then Jairus and Jairus' wife, the mother of the daughter. And they walk up to her room. And Jesus sees this 12-year-old girl, not just Jairus' daughter, but his as well, lying there. And then Jesus does something amazing. This rabbi who's not supposed to touch a deceased person, a deceased body, reaches out, and the creator of all life, who speaks life into existence, who breathed through his words life into all of creation, grabs the hand of a deceased child, holds her hand, looks at her and says two words, Talitha Kumi, which is Aramaic for child, arise. This 12-year-old girl, her eyes begin to flicker and her lungs begin to fill with breath again, and she sits up. And Jesus isn't just walking in Jairus' grief, he's walking to his victory. And he lifts the girl up and he says, someone get her something to eat. She's been through a lot. Someone get her something to eat. You know, he didn't raise this little girl for her own benefit. she was in a great place. She was with her father. She raised this little girl for the benefit of Jairus and the mom. Essentially, I think he's saying this: don't ever think the story's over with me. He who humbles himself will be exalted. And here's what I want you to hear if you feel like a middle child in the family of God. Jesus hears you. He's not ignoring you. He's not forsaking you. He's not rejecting you. You have his full attention. And he looks at you and he's like, I hear you. And if you get the healing like the woman, or if you have to experience the death like the man, he's like, I'm there in both situations. I will walk with you in your joys. I will walk with you in your grief. And either way, I want you to know your story's not over, because we're walking to your victory. And I know it's cliche, but it is so true. Every single thing in Christ that we love, Jesus is going to eventually, whether in this life or the next, reach out, grab its hand, and say, Talitha cum, child, arise. That's what I don't want you to miss. It's on the streets of desperation that we find our faith. It's on the streets of desperation where Jairus found his, where this woman found hers, and I believe it's the same street where you can find yours. Let's pray. Jesus, we come before you now recognizing your glory and recognizing your ability. And God, I don't know why we experience some of the things that we experience in this life, but I believe it's in our desperation, God. That's where oftentimes we have nothing else to do but give it over to you. And God, that's the best place for us to be. Father, I want to pray over the prayer requests that are in this room right now, where people are just struggling, they're desperate, they're begging for you to answer them. God, I want to pray over for the stories in this room that are represented by people who have already prayed, and they feel like maybe that you didn't hear them, and a loved one died, or a job was lost, or a career was forsaken, or friendships were broken. God, help them to recognize your presence, walking with them in this grief, and then walk us to your victory. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. We're going to do something a little bit different during this invitation time. On this side of the room, there's 2 baskets, and on this side of the room, there's 2 baskets. And in those baskets, there's these little tassels that, I want you to know that there's nothing magical about these tassels that are in the basket. There's nothing magical about it. Jesus told the woman that, but one of the things I do want you to know is that each of these tassels have been prayed over. The story that's represented in this tassel. And during this invitation time, we're going to sing 2 songs, and we're going to give you the opportunity just to come before Jesus, to maybe fight the crowd, to fight the pride within you and say, Jesus, I'm desperate, and I want to humble myself before you, and I want to come forward and just grab a hold of who you are. And that's what this tassel, I'm hoping, represents. That it represents, God, Jesus, I'm desperate, and I've prayed about this, and I've tried to handle it on my own, but now I come before you, and I just want to just grab a part of your garment and pray that you hear me. But then no matter what happens next, Jesus, I know you're not leaving me. And so during this time, I'm going to ask you if you want to fight on the streets of desperation. Fighting in the gospel looks a lot different, though. Fighting has nothing to do with your strength, has nothing to do with how you pray, has nothing to do with how many people you get to pray. Fighting isn't about how good you are, how many times you attend church. Fighting is falling face down before Jesus and saying, I surrender. Will you fight for me? So I know you're facing some battles, some of you. Some of you are surrounded by death. Some of you are surrounded by loss. Some of you are surrounded by disease. And in your desperation, you're like, man, Jesus, I need you in this moment. Know that you're not a middle child. You're a child. And I believe Jesus can speak these words to your situation as well. Child, arise. Talitha, during these next 2 songs, maybe you want to come up and grab a tassel and take it back to your seat. Maybe you actually want to come and fall face down before Jesus and just surrender to him with that. Maybe you want to kneel at your chair. Maybe you want to come over and grab your tassel and have someone pray over it with you. Do that now. But don't let something keep you from Jesus. I know some of you are thinking, well, I'm afraid if I go forward, maybe my wife will think that there's something wrong. Or I'm afraid that my kids will question, why am I going forward to do that? Or maybe you're like, well, I don't want to inconvenience someone in the crowd and have them stand up so that I can go around them. Man, if you've got to, crawl on your hands and face to get to your Lord and Savior, Jesus. Church, let's stand and let's fight this battle together.